Hi everyone, good morning. Hopefully you're having a nice Monday morning. It's good weather here in Hiroshima. Thanks for joining us today, Sean.
You're welcome.
And you're in Kumamoto.
Yes, so not so far from yourself.
And originally from Scotland, but you've been in Kumamoto for a long time, right?
Yes, quite well. I've been on and off back to Scotland, but yes, it's been quite a long time. Put it all together.
Nice. I actually, when I was in elementary school, I spent a year living in South Queensferry.
Oh, well, you're almost
So,
an Edinburgh girl.
yeah, my father was doing a graduate course at Edinburgh. And we lived in South Queensferry for a year, and I had developed an addiction for tablet.
I well, they didn't teach how to say Edinburgh correctly.
No,
So you
no.
said the American Edinburgh,
Yeah,
but I think it's
always
funny
wrong.
American they come and say Edinburgh and Glasgow.
I'm not that
Um,
bad. Not that bad. Um,
no, it's Edinburgh
yes,
with a r kind of Scottish r sound.
Edinburgh.
But it's great that you know a tablet.
Oh,
That's
yes.
very, very rare.
I have
Um,
a wonderful Scottish friend who lives in Hiroshima as well, and she sometimes makes it for me. It's basically sugar with more sugar and butter or something.
well, it's
Yeah.
hardly healthy.
Yeah, yeah.
You couldn't classify it as
But
healthy, would you?
it is just melt in your mouth deliciousness that I remember. My best memory from our year there, I think.
Well, it's a wonderful thing. And the thing about that is that is, funnily enough, connected to sustainability because
Wow.
the way it used to be made is that your Obajan would make it, your granny would make it, and have it in the local school fair or fete, and then you and the or jumble sale, right? And you used to buy it directly from your granny or someone else's granny, and it would make it in slightly different ways. So it's homemade, local, and normally it connected to some kind of community event. It's a very old-fashioned, sustainable culture, actually, tablet, although not good for your teeth.
No. And we were living right next to a big whiskey factory. Of course,
Oh,
I was too young to sample it, but that I thought it was interesting segue into one of your events that you did in Tokyo in 2011, Whiskey Live.
oh yeah.
I've
Mm.
got a picture of you here.
Um,
What was that about?
yeah, well, there was a Scottish whiskey production company, and they had an idea that we'd make some manga whiskey, yeah? Which doesn't mean you drink whiskey while reading manga, though you could. But we made special manga style labels, as they say, labels, and with a guy called David Kroll, his name, no, well, he was the organizer. I forgot the name of the expert, and so we had it with him on investigating some special rare types of Scottish whisky, and we made 4 or 5 different manga style whisky labels.
Wow.
They were too expensive for me to buy,
Yeah.
but they
Well,
look good.
well, we had a great discussion with Brian Ashcraft about whiskey and sake. He wrote a book about Japanese whiskey. It's got a really interesting history. I was really
Yes,
impressed.
yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about you and all your amazing books. You've written
My favourite subject.
so
Yeah,
many. You
yeah,
have,
yeah.
and quite a variety, really diverse topics. You've
Hmm.
written everything from Japanese culture, history, and heritage to politics, social issues, and then your most recent book is about gardening and mindfulness.
Hmm.
It's really like spans a lot, and not just on Japan. You've also written books on other areas, and your political books on war, and you have a section about Chomsky and everything. I mean, where do you get your inspiration for all these amazing topics?
In the Chomsky book, there's a kind of course, it's considered to be a very serious man, but I mean, he's actually quite funny in his own quiet way. And in the book, which is called Parry Comic, there's a scene where Michael Albert, who was his student in MIT, who is the main person, the real person in the book, he goes to Poland and he's having a chat in Poland about Noam Chomsky. And then the people say, "How is it that you know both Noam Chomskys just by sheer coincidence? That seems a bit weird." And he realized, huh? Oh, they're thinking of the linguist and the kind of political activist and thinking it can't be two guys. It can't be the one guy doing all that different stuff. It must be two different Noam Chomskys. And he said, no, it's the same guy doing it all. But the point is, we should have a wide variety of interests. Having a wide variety of interests should be normal, but it's not. Most people specialize in this particular thing. I mean, because of, first of all, the universities want to push people into specialisms, and normally within capitalism, our job is this specialism, and we're not expected to know anything else really. But it's not really a very good way of thinking. And as a matter of fact, this is connected to Scotland and Ireland, because the education system in Scotland and Ireland is more broad-based than in England, where you do a wider variety of subjects than they do in England. And so people, maybe it's just something unconscious in me that I've started from school knowing a broad variety of things. So to me, it seems totally normal to do a whole bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. And that's why in this Seeking Sustainability live series as well, the topics are very diverse. And I think by doing it that way, you can have little threads of similarity in terms of sustainability, but show that it's far reaching in every aspect of life and culture and everything. And I think it's so interesting to look at your history of your books and see all the different varied topics that you've covered. And then also you're living in Japan, so of course you're going to be writing and representing Japanese culture as well. It's really nice and so unusual to find an author with such a varied topical background and mostly manga and graphic
Yes,
novels. Is that right?
I just finished a book which is not a comic book. I mean, literally last Friday, I finished it. So the publisher's going to be going over it now and copy editing, etc. And that's it's called The Spirit of Japan, and it's looking at the idea of that Japanese people are supposed to be not religious, which is a common cliche. I mean, as you know, also there's several very silly cliches about what Japan is, and when you live in Japan for 3 years, you start to realize, oh, they're mostly wrong. And one of the cliches is that Japanese people are not religious. Well, in a way, they're not. But if we look at all the festivals they have, they're all kind of magical, everyday religious things. I prefer to call it magic rather than religion, right? But that's a contentious thing too. So there's lots of kind of magical things which happen in Japan. If you add it all up, it's more than what happens in America or in Britain, actually. So I just finished that book last week.
Oh, interesting. And why? I mean, it's interesting because you're in Kyushu. We also talked to Alex Bradshaw, who works at Senganen in
Yeah, in
Kagoshima,
Kagoshima. Mm,
and
mm.
and he is also very passionate about Bushido and samurai culture. And then we talked to Paul Martin, who's a samurai sword expert living in
Ah,
Tokyo.
yes. I met him in Tokyo, yeah. He took me to Golden Guy in Shinjuku.
Wow, interesting.
Well, those guys know more about it than me. I have to say that I'm not an expert. That seems a bit of a strange thing to say, that I've written 13 or 14 martial arts samurai Japanese history books, and to say that I'm not an expert. But it's true, and both of them know considerably more about it than I do. Or also William Scott Wilson, who I worked with on various of those books. Uh, he's an expert. I'm not. My job is really to do a good job on each specific thing in our visual version and adapt it and try to keep it accurate to what happened to, for example, Miyamoto Musashi, or in Alex's case, Saigo Takamori and that clan from Kagoshima who he now represents. And trying to keep it accurate and respectful, but an accessible visual version. So my job is I'm an artist rather than an expert in these kind of things. But of course, in researching the books and in writing them, I also get a fair bit of knowledge. I really am not an expert. I only kind of know it moderately. That's not false modesty. That's true.
Well, also your books have been translated into other languages. So you've had your
Yeah.
Japanese books translated into French, Spanish, Italian, German, and of course Japanese and English as well. So it's you're taking the ideas and the culture and the history and heritage and spreading it to quite a wide international audience as well. It's very interesting.
Yes, that's nice. I mean, I'm very happy to see these international versions. We don't make much money from them at all, but it's because that's not the main reason. But it's so nice to see it. Like last year, we had Turkish and Korean, which was my first time in those two languages last year. And it's so nice to see it that you get sent it from the publisher, and there's oh wow, my book in Turkish, cool. It's a kind of an enjoyable thing. I mean, and that's the key thing about uh, why I do this is because it's interesting, and all these different subjects are interesting. Excuse me, and because I get a sense of creative pleasure from doing it, a sense of meaning in my life from doing these kind of creative works.
And how many have you done so far? How many books?
I think that book we just finished is number 40,
Wow.
and it's kind of strange, and people think, how can you have written 40? How old are you? 86 or something? And well, for a start, I'm older than I look. I'm actually 50, right? And people go, so I've been basically the thing is I just write a lot. That's the thing. I mean, if you write 1 page a day, that's a 300-page book per year. Even if you've just written 1 page a day, one good page, you could write one rubbish page. So in a way, it just adds up. I don't think that I overwork really. I just do a little bit every day and it adds up. That's it. But I mean, of course, the thing is, the very key thing to mention is that I'm the writer, not the artist. Because people presume if you're a comic book person that you write it and draw it, which some people do, of course. But that's not what's normal in Britain and America. In Japan, it is normal. It's maybe about 60-70% of manga people draw and write it. But in Britain, it's more like the other way around. It's only, say, 30-40% write and do it.
Yeah,
So if I had to draw it, it would have been impossible to do those 40 books.
yeah.
That's one thing to keep in mind. I'm the writer, not the artist.
And you have so many great collaborations with illustrators and artists. How do you find people to work with on the illustrations, or how do you find these projects? Can you give us a bit of background?
Well, it's just like anything else, really. It's the domino effect. You meet one person, you meet another person, it just all connects. Well, I mean, meeting artists is not the problem. The problem is money, and so because the thing is, as I say, the kind of books I write. I mean, this is one bad thing. The kind of books I write are, you might say, too intelligent to sell well. that sounds very arrogant, but I've found in general things that sell very, very well, or movies that make hundreds of millions, they're generally not really very smart. And the more intelligent something is, the less the sales are. So unfortunately, the money element is the main barrier towards working with people. There's various artists who I'd like to work with, or who have said, would you like to join me on this new project? And the money's not been enough for them, which I don't, that doesn't mean I'm criticizing them at all. They've got rent to pay and they've got to put food on the table the same as I do, kind of thing. But the biggest barrier is money rather than finding good artists. There's plenty very good artists. And there's some artists. Well, one of the good things about my situation is that I've actually been able to work with some of the artists that I loved when I was a little boy back in Scotland. Like, for instance, Mike McMahon is one of the artists that I loved when I was 12, 13 years old, and we did a thing together. And then John M. Burns, who's been a professional artist since the late 1950s, early 1960s. and he's a fantastic colour artist. If you look at the British comic books of the 1960s, 1970s, he did wonderful painted covers, full colour. And we did the comic book adaptation of Wuthering Heights together, the famous novel Wuthering Heights. So that's a fantastic thing. And if you look at his art, it's just incredibly good. That's another little joy for me, that I've been able to be in some way connected to people that I read myself when I was a little boy.
Wow. And some of your books, especially the Japanese ones, like 47 Ronin, you have done bilingually, and your recent Olympic manga as well. What was your strategy for choosing to go bilingual?
Well, that's money as well. I mean, the thing is, especially, the thing with being an artist on any type, if you're an actor or filmmaker, comic book artist, you always have this conflict between doing something good artistically and making enough money within this kind of economic system that we're in now. And often the two things are drawing against each other very much. And the thing is, normally the publisher, of course, they want to do something good and intelligent, but the publisher especially has to think of the money aspect even more than the creator does in a way. And so that I think things like that are normally to do with what the publisher thinks will sell. But of course, we want to do something intelligent despite that financial constraint. And so the good thing about that is people learning Japanese can use it to learn English. People, vice versa, people learning English so they can read it both and they can compare it. What's the English for this? What's the Japanese for that? So it's also a learning tool. And the Olympics one, it has various pages in it which are specifically English and Japanese learning pages too. So it's partly manga, it's partly a guide to the Olympics, which of course never happened. And it's partly a kind of learning tool for Japanese and English. That Olympics thing is very funny. It's kind of intellectually, philosophically a funny thing, because I wrote it as a realistic story that was going to happen a year or so in the future when I was writing it. And it was published at the beginning of the year, January. And of course, the Olympics was cancelled. So when you read the book, it has become a fantasy book. Because these characters are walking around the realistic Tokyo, taking the underground, the subway, to this place they're supposed to go to the Olympics, and there they are. The Olympics is starting, and none of that happened in the book. So it's weird. It's gone from a realistic book to a fantasy book, and if the Olympics happens next year, it'll go back to being a realistic book again.
Except there'll be some changes. Maybe you have to put little stickers in your book to put masks on everyone.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's crazy, right? Like you look around town now and you see everybody in masks and it looks really normal. But you think, I mean, people wear masks a lot in Japan, but now absolutely like 99% are wearing masks all the time. So it's like, does that change how you're illustrating or talking with illustrators now? What we see now in books, a lot more masks maybe in Japan. What do you think?
Well, that's a good point, and I actually never thought about that, because I was thinking when it was cancelled, we were thinking, oh, that's our book, ruined, because it's only been 6 months and no one's going to get sales, no one's going to buy it. And then we looked through it and said the words 2020 are not mentioned almost anywhere in the book, just by coincidence. So we were thinking, oh, that's good, it'll be all right. But this is a good point you make now, that in the scene where everybody's getting excited about the Olympics beginning, there should be lots of masks.
And I don't know. I mean, they say they're going ahead with the Olympics in 2021, but technically it's still called the 2020 Olympics because it's a carryover. I find it hard to imagine that anybody's going to be able to come from other countries because a lot of countries are on lockdown, not letting people out, as well as, I mean, Japan seems more open for business than other countries, but it'll be really interesting to see. But interesting book anyway. It'll be like a piece of history and people will discuss how things have changed from the perception before the Olympics and then what actually happened or did not happen in 2020, 2021.
Well, again, it's a kind of interesting, like, philosophical thing that we can call it 2020 while it's happening in 2021. I mean, it's one of those things that we, of course, we don't think about it ourselves, but when we see that, I think, oh yes, this whole idea of time is weird. We've just invented this whole thing. We can just call 2021 2020. It's up to us.
It's a
And it
Jedi
kind of
mind trick.
well, it reminds us that what the nature of language is and how language relates to ourselves and how we place words onto objects which are actually not. It's not a key and it's not a tree. It's some other thing. We just put the word tree and the word key onto it. That kind of thing, like, reminds us, oh yeah, we invented this thing language.
That's
Not you and I.
interesting. Yeah. No,
Someone else
interesting.
did. The Sumerians did.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you said in the podcast, really excellent podcast with Holdfast that you did recently, was talking about how reliability you think is one of the big reasons why you've been so successful with publishers.
Hmm.
Do you want to talk about
Well,
that a little bit?
what I was saying then again, and this is not false modesty, is that I'm not so vastly successful. Actually, I'm only moderately successful. And again, I say that not false modesty, it's just true. But to get to a level of being moderately successful in any creative thing is already very difficult, especially starting from nothing, as I did. But yeah, I think that essentially that's true. And again, it does all come back to money, because the thing is, the publisher has a schedule, and coronavirus has really knocked publisher schedules to pieces over the last year, or last from now and going forward to a year. They have schedules which they have to keep to for the distributor. And often for publishers, the distributor is more important than the creators, one way or another. They listen to the distributor more than they do to us. But if you're late, then the publisher is going to look bad for the distributor and all the bookshops and get a bad reputation. And so it's very much a time-related industry, book publishing, and movies as well, and music as well. And so getting things done on time is a very key thing for publishers, and it causes them a lot of trouble. And so the thing is, again, now that is also kind of a contrary thing between doing a good job and doing it on time. So the thing with book writing is you need to try to learn the skill of doing a good job on time, and that's not easy, especially for artists, because drawing a page of comic book or manga takes a long time. This is one of the kind of unfortunate bad things about comics. You have an image of being kind of easy and for children and not a very sophisticated thing. Well, some people still have that very old-fashioned image, which has never been true, but it's quite a strong image. But the thing is, if you take, like, say, a magazine illustration, who often get more money than comic book artists, it's just basically one illustration, and you send it to the newspaper, and that's it. A comic book artist has to do 4 or 5 of those every page. Right? It's really a lot of work. And it's amazing that there's so many people who want to be comic book artists, considering that it's a tremendous amount of work and skill involved in being a comic book artist.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the art now. Writing is, of course, different because you don't actually have to physically draw it. But of course, it's an interesting skill in itself, comic book writing, which is also very underrated.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about your project, The Garden? I found it really interesting. And
It's over there. Can you see it now?
No. Oh, it's behind you. Yeah.
Hi. Self-promotion.
Yeah.
It's a very nice hardcover book as well. Very beautiful production. Yeah, so the thing, what happened here was I have gardens myself. I've made all around this house which I live in, which was completely concrete before, which is connected to a point I want to get onto later about how Japanese people unfortunately, are not very interested in gardens anymore, or at least the interest is going down. This was all completely concrete all around here, and I kind of gardenified it um, by digging up various things and adding pot plants all around here. So I'm surrounded by plants now. It takes me a long time to water them every day. So what happened was a person who was interested in checking out graphic novels, because again, we need more adult readers. So if any of your people watching this, if you've not read any comic books or graphic novels or manga, it's basically three different words for the same thing, kind of. Well, that's a contentious point too. Um, please check out some of these good stuff, because the first thing is comic books are much more sophisticated than you maybe think they are. And also, of course, nowadays we have very much a focus on gender and racial and ethnic equality. Comic books are a very good example of that. When I was a boy, it used to be like 90% men, normally white men. Now, the range of people who create comic books is very wide. There's lots of women creating comic books. There's lots of comic books about gay people's experience, lesbian experience. I just ordered a comic book from a Black American person talking about their experience of being in gangs in, I think it's Chicago. The book hasn't arrived yet. And there's lots of comic books talking about serious social issues by a wide variety of creators now. So we really need more readers to support this. This is, in a way, the best time for comic books that there's ever been in terms of subject matter and people creating them, this sophistication. But someone asked me, oh, I'm interested in gardens. Are there any comic books, any graphic novels on gardening? And I said, oh, I can't think of any. Maybe I should do one myself. Ha ha ha. And then after I thought, wait a minute, yeah, why don't I? So just the funny thing was that this book happened from that person asking me this, and within less than a month, I'd got the contract to do it from that conversation, which is very, very fast, because sometimes it can take years for these things. So it was. I think it was exactly a month later, and I'd already signed the contract with Liminal, publisher in Britain, to do this. And so it all came from that joke that no, maybe I should do one myself. And then Fumio, who's the artist from, I think, where is he from? Kanagawa? But he lives in Britain now. He lives in the southeast of England, or the south middle of England. And him and I had met, we had met in Kumamoto just a few months before that. And I really like his art. I mean, it's very, very good, subtle color artwork. And so I wanted to do a book with him at some point. Lovely artwork he has. And so it's one of those things where everything just came together very, very quickly. The idea came to me very easily. And I was thinking, okay, let's do one on gardening, but let's have it not just on the visuals of gardening, but how gardening is something as a kind of mental activity, a meditational activity. And I thought, okay, mindfulness, and let's bring the character to Japan, and she learns a little bit of Zen, meditation type things, and we'll put it all together. So it came together very, very easily. I don't really believe in there's a God up there, moving us around like chessboards. I think it's a bit of a silly idea. But sometimes things happen in your life where everything just comes together very easily. And this book is one of them.
Yeah.
Of course, other times it's very difficult. It doesn't come together.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important, especially now, to be mindful of the things that you have and the things that you can appreciate. Like we were talking about the Shimanami Kaido cycling the other day with a woman.
I watched that one. Yeah.
With a woman in Australia, and she's locked in. She can only go out for exercise once a day for an hour at a time. And
I saw that lady.
and I went, because she inspired me. I can go out, so I went out and for half a day went cycling around Shimanami, and then we connected virtually. But I love this idea of being mindful even in your own garden, because a lot of people are stuck at home right now, and
Yeah.
this is something they can do.
Well, it's a very funny thing because, again, we talk about everything coming together for this book. Could it have come out at any time in history, a better time than now? The coronavirus, very strange, because the character in it is sick from work, and she's got kind of karoshi type things, as they say in Japanese, overwork, death from overwork. So she, in the situation, she's overworked, and she has basically a breakdown, and the doctor tells her that you better take some time off to recover, and so she's in a kind of lockdown situation, and her sister says to her, "Well, what are you going to do with your time?" And then sister says, "Why don't you make a garden out of this mess here?" And so she does that. Of course, there's millions of people, well, not millions, hundreds of millions of people in the world now doing the same kind of thing,
Yeah, I think
because
a lot of us
like
around
they
the
don't have any
world.
choice, like the Australian lady you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a weird thing that this came out just at this time.
Yeah.
But of course, many people have been saying that, in an odd kind of way, and it seems horrible to say it, but there's been more people saved from coronavirus than there's been killed, in a way, from the decrease in pollution and the decrease in road accidents. Of course, I think is it something near 1 million people have been killed now by coronavirus, or is it something like that?
It's a lot.
3 million people are killed every year in car accidents. Still now, it's still 3 times as many as have been killed by coronavirus. So, I mean, this is a key thing that we need to turn to next.
Yeah.
How are we going to decrease road pollution and car deaths, etc.? Sorry.
And it's also connected to your passion to save gardens in Japan, that you
Yeah.
you wrote in Japan Times a letter to your local government asking for people to keep gardens. Can you explain your story that you wrote a little bit? Well, it's more
I think it
activism.
was addressed to the Tokyo government, actually,
Mm-hmm.
the general Tokyo government. Well, the thing is, this is again another cliche of Japan, and you know that living in Japan, there's 3 or 4 key cliches, which are either only half right or totally incorrect. And unfortunately, one of the cliches about Japan, you see it everywhere, is Japanese people love nature, and they're it's a very kind of Orientalism type idea in terms of I'm talking about incorrect idea of Orientalism. That's Edward Said's book. That Japanese people are kind of one with nature. And of course, the reality is always more complicated than that. And unfortunately, the situation that we're in over the last, it seems to be roughly since the 1980s, is that gardens are less and less popular with Japanese people, which is a big surprise for most people in the world. So it's the exact opposite of the image of Japanese. But if anyone who lives in Japan now for 5, 10 years will notice gardens disappearing all around them. And this right over there, I'm pointing to the window next door, used to have 20 different trees in it. And I've taken a photo from that and used that in another article. There's now not a single tree in this section, not one at all. And this has been repeated all over Japan, to what I estimate to be something like 10 million trees lost every year. This is according to my research, that uh, the average amount of trees in new houses, where there's an old house and an old garden, and they knock down the old house, normally because the obaja and ojan are dead, the granny and granddad, um, and they make a new house, destroy the old garden completely, 100% or 90%, and then make the new house and put maybe just one bush at the front. So according to my research, and I've gone all over many different places and recorded about at least 50 different sites, and the average replanting rate is only 5% of what it was previously. Now, if we expand that across to the million new houses built every year in Japan, it's actually 900,000 according to the Japanese government, but let's call it a million. That comes to at least 10 million trees less every year.
Yeah.
Now, this is very, very bad.
I often think that, walking around neighborhoods, you see the old houses come down, and like you were saying in the article, the old house is surrounded by a small but very green garden. And then
Mm.
the new build, usually of a mansion, apartment building, has zero
Yeah.
greenery around it. It's
This
all
is the same in
concrete.
your area?
Yeah, I
Because I
see that
always
all
ask
the time.
people, because if you're trying to be, I'm trying to be semi thorough about this research, because I studied sociology and psychology in Glasgow in the university, and you taught that social scientists need to try and be thorough in their research as well. So I'm applying my university study, and I always ask, you always have to think that it might be your bias in research or just your area which has done this, and you can't extrapolate to the whole area. So I always try to ask people, what's happening in your area? Please tell me what's happening in Hokkaido and Osaka. But almost always people tell me that's exactly what's happening in my area too.
Yeah. And
Uh,
we moved house. We were renting. We had a big outdoor area. I had over 10 years planted a bunch of trees and bushes. And then when we were leaving and we moved to a house where we own it now, I transferred some of the trees, but I left some which were beautiful. And I thought the next owners will love this. And of course, when I walked by the old house, everything was gone. They had, and
yes,
I don't think it was the new owners. I think it was the new residents. I think it was the owner, because the image is having a garden is troublesome,
yes.
mendokusai. And so to rent it
And looks,
out, they thought would just decimate everything and have no greenery, and people would prefer that. So I think it's a very complicated. There's a lot going on,
it is
right?
complicated.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, my new article about it is coming out today, later today. And it will be in the website called Japan Daily. And if you go onto Japan Daily, I think it should be the first article on the top because it is literally coming out like an hour or two later,
Wow, good
like
timing.
later this morning. Yeah, it is good time.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another very impactful book that you wrote about Minamata.
Mm.
Tell me
Yeah.
about how that came about. That's a very serious event in Japanese history. Um,
Mm.
how did you
Well,
get involved with that project?
I'm laughing about that, and I'm not sure I should tell you why, but um, no, I better keep it a secret. There's a funny thing happened about that. I better keep it a secret. The publisher would be angry. um, but the thing about Minamata is a friend of mine called Brian Small, who's American and lives in Miyazaki. He is very active as a kind of environmental campaigner, and he gets involved with various Japanese groups. Uh, Unfortunately, that's not really a strong movement in Japan compared to Britain or America and France and many other countries. But there are some people working as environmental campaigners in Japan. And he said to me, Sean, you should come down to Minamata and let me introduce you to the Minamata sufferer people and the people who are helping them in the centres. He said they would make a great manga. So again, this was also a suggestion from someone else. And because this is the kind of thing I want to do, I want to do things that are books that are about something important, social issues, and not just silly, shallow stuff. And so I thought, yeah, good, let me come down. So I went down with him. He took me down there. And me, him, and then a few Japanese people went, and we went around all the Minamata areas. And funnily enough, at that time, Johnny Depp had been there like a few months before. And I think, or maybe his movie's been delayed as well now, but they're doing a Minamata related thing. And I said to him, well, maybe I shouldn't criticise Johnny Depp. His lawyers will get onto me, but I think he hadn't personally been there and spoken to them, right? And I was thinking, well, I'm here. I'm going to speak to you and try and get your direct experience. So we went there and we researched it, and then Stone Bridge Press, who are a good publisher in California, they again they like that kind of thing too. They want to do things which are on East Asia, which is their specialism, but something with some merit. And so they said, "Oh, good." They agreed to publish it. It should be coming out next May. I think it is, or June or May next year, 2021. And so again, the thing about that is the same with all my kind of things. I'm trying to think, how can I do an accurate book, but make it accessible? A good visual account, which is accurate to what's happening in this particular, whether it's Miyamoto Musashi or Minamata, I'm thinking the same thing. Let me try and make it accurate to what we know happened or what we think happened, but make it accessible and visual and a smooth read, not in the narrative and visuals. So yeah, that's coming out next year. Now, of course, obviously that's on a very important related environmental topic too, and a classic example of the environment versus money, or people versus corporations, which of course is more and more a focus. I think I told you that I'm anti-capitalist myself, and Minamata is a classic example of that. The corporations and the government who were in their pockets were denying the environmental damage and
Well,
being
it's
absolutely the opposite of sustainability. But the
it's
pressure of people gradually broke them down, and they had to admit how they were acting in not sustainable ways.
yeah, and
Sorry.
it's so important to remember. And yesterday, Patagonia just released a really fantastic documentary available free on YouTube about public lands in America, and how without public lands being protected, they're being sold to private interests. And the
Another book
disaster,
related.
the
Sorry.
environmental disaster of copper mining, fossil fuel industry getting into beautiful, pristine public lands. And this is not only happening in America, of course, this is happening all over the world. So,
Yes.
reminding us what happens when private interest becomes more important than the land and the people who live there, even in Japan, is really important. And even in Hiroshima, we see Chuo-koen, our central park, which is the only publicly accessible green space, which is now being changed to a soccer stadium, where everybody used to be able to go use that green space. Now it's going to be concreted over, and only people with tickets will be able to use that space. But it was
Well, this
created as a
sorry.
part of the peace park idea that we need to have green spaces for people to recover after the horrible disaster that was Hiroshima's attack. And it's happening all the time in Japan and America, and we have to remind ourselves what happens when we let money and short-term profits take priority over the long-term health of people and planet, right?
It's very, very important. I just reached over to get my other book, which is this one, The Many, Not the Few. And that goes into what is, I think, the first case in the world where this started to happen. These images here. If you can see that this person's looking at that fence, that is when this kind of thing, it may have happened in other parts of the world too, I suppose, but this is the first time it happened in Britain, specifically mainly the south of England in this case. And of course, this is from, of course, this is hundreds of years ago now, but this process of privatizing the commons and blocking off and saying, that's my land, you cannot go onto this land now. That's a running chapter, a running theme in this. Of course, it's the many, not the few. So this is a very, very important thing, which again, unfortunately, doesn't happen enough in Japan. That the many, us majority, need to stand up to the rich, powerful few, who are trying to basically making the world worse, to put it in very simple terms. But so I mean, the key thing for me, one of the things I'm a little bit disappointed, not a little bit, a lot disappointed about many people who focus on sustainability, is they seem to want to use capitalism to fix problems caused by capitalism. Right? I mean, it's a little bit like saying I'm going to stop being an alcoholic by drinking a different type of alcohol. It might be better to stop drinking alcohol. So the thing is, we need to, if we're really serious about sustainability, we need to think about how is the economic and political system the cause of pollution and environmental damage, etc., etc. And it's not going to be enough to keep a kind of basically exploitative economic system and then readdress some of the damage it does every now and then. Right? It's not enough. We need to have an economic system which has sustainability in its core. And that, I think, is the key thing we need to be focusing on. Of course, we need
Absolutely.
to do small things on the way.
100%.
Right?
Plus, if you think about it, if you don't have natural resources, you don't have clean water, you don't have healthy food grown in your country, how is your economic future going to be successful? You have to keep the economic interests in balance with the needs of people and the needs of the environment. It all works together. It's not separate. You can't just make money at the cost of the environment or at the cost of people and have enough money in the future. So it doesn't make sense to me how people are damaging the environment and damaging communities so much and just thinking about short-term profits. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it certainly doesn't make sense if we want to kind of apply logic to it. But unfortunately, as you know, as human beings, we're not
Yeah.
all that good at the old logic. So, I mean, the thing is, I think if we look at it from another point of view, I think it does make sense because, or we can see the smaller internal logic of the damage. Because, first of all, to do with, for instance, that building right next door, if we take a very, very small example, that plot of land, they're, first of all, not thinking that they're damaging their environment. That's the first thing. They're thinking this is just normal. And of course, unfortunately, normal is a big enemy for us, actually. There's lots of negative things that we do as human beings, and we just say, well, that's normal. We're out thinking, well, is it a good normal? Is it a positive, healthy normal? Often it's not. So I think that's the first thing that they're just not thinking that they're damaging the environment. And the other thing is this idea, which psychologists look of diffused responsibility. You've got 6 people who are in your way as you're trying to walk along. Each person's only slightly in your way, so they don't really think it's their responsibility to move out your way. It's kind of that too. Like thinking, well, that little bit of land doesn't really matter if we've taken away 20 trees. And of course, in a way, in a kind of a small logical way, that's correct. It doesn't matter, but when it adds up to a million new houses,
Yeah.
then it makes 10 million new trees. So this is the problem, that we need to kind of go beyond our specific thing to look at how it's interrelated. But I mean, I think we can't be critical too much, because it does seem to make sense in a small way that damaging this bit of land doesn't really matter very much. And then, of
It's
course, if we look at
it's
what's happening, as you
like
say, South America. Oh, sorry.
it's like using plastic straws, right? What is it going to matter if one person
One
uses
shot.
a plastic straw? Says
Yeah.
10 million people. I mean, it makes a difference. Every
Yeah.
little better choice that you can make, but you first, like you said, you first have to realize that there is another choice, which is I think Japanese people in Japan do really care about nature, do really care about environment and culture.
Yes, they do.
But they're, like you said, under the illusion that that's just the way it is. It doesn't really have a big effect. So we need better PR, public relations kind of information coming
Mm.
around us, showing us that it does make an effect, that we should make better choices, right? And then,
Well, that's partly what I'm trying to do with my articles. And I say this, the one that's coming out today is, well, it's a bit of a long, rambling article. It's actually 3,000 words, which is too long normally for a newspaper type article. But it's going into various details about why is it, what's the actual psychology and the economics um, behind this, at least from what I know so far. Um, it's an ongoing thing for me to try to understand it more too, of course. But I think probably eventually it will. Japanese people will start to think, yeah, that's really not very environmentally sound. It's not eco, as they say here.
yeah,
But unfortunately, we're quite far off from that now in Japan. Right, they're still very much in the kind of, let's just cut down the trees. But one Daiwa House and Sekisui House, the two of the very big ones. Now, I have to say, Daiwa House have not been good in their response. Right, I've given
But
them a
you know,
chance to respond, but it's very bad.
you do
Well,
see
let me
some
just
good
finish this.
examples. Yeah, you do see
Right.
some.
Well, Daiwa were not good in their response, right? And I'm going to keep at them. But I think they're ignoring me now. They think I'm Mendoza. But Sekisui House have been quite good.
Yeah.
They responded to me saying, well, we're trying this, this, and this. And they seem genuinely to be making an effort to promote replanting. And they told me that they are replanting 1 million trees a year, which of course is very, very good. Well done, Sekisui. But it still leaves 9 million down, even if they're
But
putting 1 million back.
even
But
if
it's a start.
some of the big companies even make a small change, it has a big effect. And Seksui House was actually mentioned in the series by another talk. She did a book on all the sustainable innovation happening in Japan in businesses.
Is this the Joy Henry lady? No, Joy
No.
Henry.
No, I will have to put the link
Sure.
below. It wasn't that long ago, but yeah, definitely there are some great examples that we should promote and then try to give positive changes that the companies that aren't doing so well can do.
Yes.
We've only got 8 more minutes, so I
Oh.
want to shift back to your books a little bit. You did a recent book on the yokai.
Yes.
We had
Which I don't
Matt.
have to hand. Where is it?
Yeah, I've got an example showing on the screen right now. We had
Okay.
Matt Alt and Hiroko talking about their yokai book,
Ah,
and
yes.
yours is very different. It's not just explaining the yokai; it's more like a story.
Yes. Well, Lafcadio Hearn, or Koizumi Akin, as they call him in Japanese, as a matter of fact, the university is just over there, and I do a little bit of work in connection to the university as well. And he was an English teacher there 120 years ago, and he used to walk up this road behind the house, up to the hill for his lunch, have his sandwiches or his onigiri or whatever it was, and go back down to the university there 120 years ago. And when I was writing, this is actually the second big book I've written based on his Japanese ghost stories and stories of Japanese culture. And I realized when I was writing it that the Gaelic meaning of my mother's name is the follower of Herne, which is a funny coincidence because I'm in this here on the same street, literally, as a kind of a literal follower of Herne, and that's the Gaelic meaning of my mother's maiden name. Mulhern is the name. Mull means follower or descendant of Herne in the original Irish Gaelic, we should say. And so basically, we've taken lots of his interesting Japanese stories, which he collected. Him and his wife, his Japanese wife, collected those stories from Japanese people 120 years ago, and he published lots of good books, which I think are probably the most well-known books of a Western person about Japan at that time. And they're very visual books, very interesting, fun books, as well as being intelligent and about real Japanese culture. And so they're not horror actually. They're more like kind of mystery stories and intriguing stories about Japanese culture. So it just came out from Toto, the big publisher Toto, last week, and it will. I think it's actually coming out in the bookshops in Japan this week. So please go to your local bookshop and get a copy of my book.
Yeah, it looks.
Don't manbiki, as they say in Japanese. Don't shoplift.
Yeah.
That's one of
No.
my favorite words in Japanese, manbiki, because it means shoplifting, right? But if you listen to manbiki, it sounds like something very, very cute. It sounds like a cute little dog. Oh, little manbiki. But Japanese people say, oh, don't say that. That's a bad word.
So I love how your books on culture and history and heritage, it's providing more accessibility to these stories for English speakers, but also for people in Japan, maybe young people who are studying English, and they can relearn the old stories through English
Yeah.
study as well. I think there's a lot of various uses that these books can have, as well as, of course, telling these stories to people abroad or international audience.
Yes, I hope so. And you mentioned all the kind of languages. It's 12 or 13 languages now, and it's really nice to see that it's spreading to different countries. And sometimes people post something on their Instagram that someone in Argentina has got our book there. So you think it's nice to see that. Yes, and of course that's another problem that a problem with in Japan is that young people have very little historical knowledge in Japan, in my experience. I mean, for example, as I say, the university is there, and there's a little kind of what do you call it in Japanese? Hibun, like a kind of white stand explaining some important thing. I think it's called hibun in Japanese. Um, and Miyamoto Musashi's funeral march was from the castle. That castle that he lived in is finished now, it's gone. But they went from there and it walked right the way through the university area. And there's a little marker in wood just up there to note it. And 99% of the students in the university have no idea it's there, even though it's only like 2 minutes from where they're having their classes. And the thing is, we should know that kind of history. It's not difficult to know that. But all the people in the university should know that. Right? And there's a statue for Lafcadio O'Hearn in there too. And I'm wondering how many of the students have ever read it, because there's a little description in Japanese and English. Right? And it says some good things about it. It says, actually, funnily enough, it's connected to sustainability. I didn't think about that before. It says it's a big block of stone, and it says on it in 1894, I think, that he's worried about the disappearance of a Kyushu spirit. He sends that underneath a Kumamoto spirit of basically sustainability. He doesn't use that word, of course. It's a very rather modern, trendy word now. But he said I think he says thriftiness actually, which in a way is the same as sustainability. It's connected. He's worried about a disappearance of that spirit of thriftiness and appreciation of small things. Because in this case, he was worrying about westernization destroying that older Japanese spirit, which I think, unfortunately, he was right about.
Well, there's so much. If we just look back at 20 years before in Japan, we've got so much culture of reusing things. The whole concept of motainai was really strong. And of course, you shouldn't buy too many things from abroad. You should buy locally. You should grow your own food. You should reuse your containers. People often refer to the Edo period as being the height of sustainability in Japan because people were trying to use local innovation to use products longer and to fix things. So even in Japan, if we have so many great examples, we just need to look back in history a little bit before we used plastic prolifically and other modern conveniences which are really damaging to the environment but also to people.
Yes, that's a very good point. And so, in a way, this is a kind of positive. I mean, I'm very positive. I mean, I'm strongly against capitalism, but I'm very positive, and I think that we will eventually move towards a better way of organizing ourselves, one way or another, in Japan, America, and France, and everywhere. But I think it's the key thing we need to do is it's not really a question of Western culture destroying Japanese culture. Of course, that's partly what happened in the change to the Meiji era. But the key thing is the destructive nature of the economic system in the world, wherever we are, whether it's Brazil, they're still chopping down the rainforest in Brazil, even more now with the right-wing government that they elected recently. It's a question of how we organize our own societies wherever we are in the world. And the key enemy is, are we going to have an exploitative economic and political system or a sustainable political economic system? Now, I did the SDG Academy course recently with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and he called the name of the course was Post-Capitalist System. Right? And I was thinking it was very brave of him to call it post-capitalist, because there's still a lot of people who have a kind of negative image of the whole idea of can we move beyond capitalism. But he went into lots of very good examples in the course. It's an excellent course. You can do it online. I advise anyone to have a look at it, about how we can move practically in all different parts of the world to a system which is going to be a genuinely sustainable system.
Yeah. And that's our hour, but I agree with you 100%. We have solutions at our fingertips. We just need to make the right choices. And we have innovation. We have so many great ideas and so many smart people. We just need to give them the power to follow these ideas through. So thank you so much for yes, and soft pressure, like you are doing with your books. I think introducing important Japanese history and heritage to an international audience is also preserving it for Japanese people. So I see so much of a sustainable theme in everything that you're doing. So thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much, John. That's good.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Yeah, gambarimashou, right?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for watching, and look forward to your comments or questions below after it's been posted on YouTube or Facebook as well. We didn't get any while we were live, but feel free to add them after. And join us again tomorrow at 9 a.m. We're talking to Noriko Shindo about promoting vegan and plant-based options in Japan. So please join us again tomorrow at 9. Thank you so much, Sean. That was awesome.
Thank you, Joy.
We'll connect again soon. I'd love to come visit you in Kumamoto someday.
Yes, well, it's a nice place and not so far from where you are in Hiroshima. I've been there 2 or 3 times. And I'm sad to hear that about the park that you were mentioning.
Yeah, it's really sad. But I love Kyushu. I lived in Kyushu for 3 years. I'd love to come back and re-explore the Kumamoto area. It's beautiful.
Which Kumamoto spirit.
Yes, for sure.
That's funny, but I didn't think about that. It's basically a sustainable message that he wrote there in 120 years ago on that rock in the university.
And of course, we talked about shochu from your area in this series so far as well. So I'd love to try some Kumamoto shochu as well.
There's some famous ones. I did an article about that at the beginning of the year, Johnny, just before coronavirus hit us.
Nice.
About a specialist bar, and the guy was telling me various different types of Kumamoto ones.
I think you might be the only one in the series so far from Kumamoto. So thank you for representing.
I'm representing my hood.
Yes, wonderful. Okay. So thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.